I challenge you to a duel.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Movie Duel podcast. My name is Peter and I'm your host. On each episode of the Movie Duel podcast, we select a subject based around movies and then two of my co-hosts each pick a film that they think best fits that subject. The only rule being that you can't pick a film that has already been discussed on the podcast. However, you are finding us in the midst of our second ever Mega Duel. So these are our annual run of episodes in which we pick a subject, and then myself and the rest of my co-hosts, the movie duelists, each pick a film for the chosen subject, and then we dedicate an episode to each one of our choices. So this is week number 4 of our best ever horror movie run of episodes, and this week is Vanessa's choice of the Wes Craven classic Scream. But before we get into that, just a few reminders about getting in touch with us. All of our links to social media and contact details are in the show notes for this episode. And also, you can find a link to our Patreon page, which gives you the option for a small monthly fee, to get some extra bonus content from us here at the Movie Duel podcast as well. And then finally, just a word of warning that there will be spoilers for Scream, and there will be some strong language as well. So let's head on over to part 4 of Mega Duel 2.
Tatum, just get in the car.
Hello, Sydney.
Hi. Who is this?
You tell me.
Well, I have no idea.
Scary night, isn't it? With the murders and all, it's like right out of a horror movie or something.
Randy, you gave yourself away. Are you calling from work? Because Tatum's on her way over.
Do you like scary movies, Sydney?
I like that thing you're doing with your voice, Randy. It's sexy.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Oh, come on. You know I don't watch that shit.
Why not? Too scared?
No, it's just what's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
Are you alone in the house?
Randy, that's so unoriginal. I'm disappointed in you.
Maybe that's because I'm not Randy.
So, who are you?
The question isn't, who am I? The question is, where am I?
So, where are you?
Your front porch.
Okay, so welcome back to Vanessa. Hello, Vanessa.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm all right. I'm good.
Recovered from your
Try not
wasp sting?
Recovered from my wasp sting. It's still pretty itchy and I've got like a wee lump, but I'm pretty sure I've not gone into anaphylactic shock. I think that happens fairly immediately.
Not 3 days later, yeah.
Not 3 days later. So yeah, I've recovered from that. So yeah, in August now when we're recording. So it's coming to that part of the summer where wasps are an issue, and you know, it's not quite as, like, the days aren't quite as long as they were. Like, it's getting a wee bit darker earlier on. So it's like that bit before you get to autumn, clinging on to this. I don't know what I'm fucking rabbiting on about, but
Well, I've tried. Do you know what I've tried on these Mega Duel episodes to really try and sort of scale back the weather talk and the time of
and
year
it's so
talk.
difficult.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. It's
We
so
didn't.
hard.
Me and Nicole managed to do it, I think, just about, and it's like, yeah, we're back to it now. It's
Well, it wasn't so much going on with the weather. It was more about the amount of daylight. Do you know the one nice thing about this time of the year? I'm not a huge lover of the winter, but it's nice going into, and this is quite appropriate for what we're talking about. It's quite nice going into autumn. I do quite like autumn, and I like Halloween. I like an excuse to watch more horror films than
Yeah.
normal. I'm not really into like fucking pumpkin spice lattes and all that nonsense, but I like it getting a bit darker and you're able to like maybe put a hoodie on and watch a movie and stuff like it. It's so from that kind of perspective, it's quite a nice time of the year. And I don't know about you. I think you're pretty much the same, but in October you use it as a bit of an excuse to try and watch kind of more horror, revisit old horrors, and quite often we get quite a lot of new stuff out at that time of the year as well.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, what I've sort of talked to everybody about on these episodes so far, and I mean, me and you have probably talked more on this podcast about our history with horror. But I mean, in terms of generally, when you started to become a fan of horror films, when did that sort of start for you?
Probably around the time I watched the film I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
I mean, I have talked about this before on podcasts, and like you, I grew up with stuff like Round the Twist, Eerie, Indiana,
Hmm.
like The Witches, Addams Family. Obviously, we talk about the X-Files a lot, which is a fairly
Hmm.
solid amount of horror in it. So I think if you're kind of around 40-ish and you were kind of grown up in your formative years were in the 90s, there was a lot of spooky stuff going
Mm.
on, basically. So although I would have called myself a full-blown horror fan by the kind of mid-90s, like all the like kid shows and stuff aimed at maybe like teenagers and young adults. Like I remember like the Terry Deary books, the Point Horror, the Goosebumps. I'm obviously obsessed with It by Stephen King, which I first read when I was about 12, 13, and then
Mm.
continued to read Stephen King books. So I think in that time, I mean, people talk about the 90s not being the greatest decade for horror, which I'm sure we'll come on to when we talk about the movie. But I think it was quite a good decade for up and coming horror fans to get
Yeah.
into.
Well, I
Does
think
that make sense?
I think there was a lot, when you think about it, there was a lot of really sort of classic films that got talked about in the 90s because they either had sort of quite important anniversaries, 20, 25 years, a lot of films from the 70s. You had films that started to get re-released or they were reappraised a little bit. Stuff that was banned, Exorcist was banned, Clockwork Orange. I believe Texas Chainsaw was banned for a period as well, and they all started to get sort of big re-releases in the 90s as well. So it was this really cool kind of microcosm of getting these new films like the one we're going to talk about today. Some of these really sort of lower budget indie films in there as well. But they were starting to Hollywood or cinema was starting to sort of consider everything that had come before and starting to really sort of push it as being an important phase of cinema history. And then, you got re-releases, you got sequels or requels or whatever you want to call them to, classic horror films, or you got the next evolution in those horror films, whether it was, Halloween H2O or Jason X a little bit later on, and films like that were really, or even New Nightmare, there was a lot that was still sort of being bandied around from that classic era of horror films.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I mean, we'll come on to obviously the film we're talking about references a lot of older horror
Mm.
movies, and I obviously hadn't seen them in the mid 90s, but I had seen things like Jaws, which I consider to be a horror movie. I had
Hmm.
seen Jurassic Park, I had seen The Witches, I'd seen even things like Raiders, where it's not a horror movie, but that kind of final sequence where they
Horror
open the
elements, yeah,
ark.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's horror elements in it. So although by the point of the mid 90s, I hadn't seen any kind of, and in quote marks, kind of classic horrors, I'd definitely seen a lot of stuff that was at least horror adjacent, if
Yeah,
not,
absolutely,
like
yeah.
monster movie type stuff as well. Like I suppose Jurassic Park and Jaws, I do consider them horror movies, but they're more of that kind of monster thing than somebody stalking babysitters or
Yeah.
some supernatural or whatever. But I think it was a good gateway decade for getting into horror. And a lot of people I speak to about my own age all cite the same kind of things that got them into horror, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So we'll get to it then. So, Vanessa, what is your choice for the best horror movie ever?
Okay, just going to preface it with I have very much done this of what is my favourite horror movie ever. If I was to objectively say what the best horror movie ever was, I would probably be saying something like The Shining or The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. However, I have definitely gone with personal favourite, and it is 1996's Scream.
Hello?
Hello?
Who is this?
You tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Someone is playing a deadly game.
It all began with a scream over 911.
Someone who's seen one too many scary movies. Now, he's taken his love of fear
Hello?
Hello, Sydney.
one step too far.
Do you like scary movies?
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a scary movie. Number one, you can never have sex.
Hey, this me.
Never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back. Get another beer, you want one? Yeah, sure. I'll be right back!
He didn't make the rules.
The police are always off track. If they watch prom night, they save time.
He just kills by them. Don't answer the phone. Don't open the door. Don't try to hide.
Everybody's a suspect!
You're not scared, are you?
Scream.
Excellent. So, Scream, yes, directed by Wes Craven, written by Kevin Williamson, and starring Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott, David Arquette as Dewey Riley, Courtney Cox as Gail Weathers, Matthew Lillard as Stu Macher. That sounds so scouse, doesn't it? Stu Macher.
Macher.
Stu Macher. Rose McGowan as Tatum Riley, Skeet Ulrich as Billy Loomis, Jamie Kennedy as Randy Meeks, and Drew Barrymore as Casey Becker. So, would you like to give us a synopsis, please, Vanessa? For
Yes,
Scream?
I haven't got it written down, so I'm just going to try and do one off the hoof. But Scream is a movie about a town in California. I think it is. It's a fake town, but it's supposed to be in California, which is kind of terrorized by one or more masked killers. It is a kind of high school movie, so all our main players in the movie are, well, supposedly at high school. They all look older than they would be at high school, but they're supposed to be, I think, about what, 17, something like that.
Yeah,
16,
I would
17,
say so, yeah.
something like that. And yeah, this film's kind of I can't think of the word. Talked about as reigniting the slasher genre after a bit of a lull. And as well, sorry, I'm all over the place with the synopsis, as well as all of that, it is one of the first, and I suppose it's probably not the first, because I don't know if we'll get onto this, but New Nightmare was probably the first, but it's a much more knowing slasher where all the kids in the movie meta. I hate that word, but I think I hate it because fucking Mark Zuckerberg's like stolen it for his company.
right.
I think that's the reason I don't like it. But yeah, it is meta or kind of postmodern. Like, people in the movie know the rules of scary movies because they've grown up watching things like Halloween and Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. So it's quite self-referential, even to the point of like the Nightmare on Elm Street films being mentioned and Drew Barrymore's character saying, "Oh, the first was good and the rest were crap" and stuff like that. But yeah, and yeah, it's basically just a slasher movie where people get picked off. But unlike a lot of other slasher movies before it, where you knew who the killer was, there's also a whodunit element with Scream because you don't know who the killer is. You do find out at the end there's actually more than one killer. I'll take it we're doing like full spoilers and whatever. And
we always do. For how long have you been doing this podcast,
I don't
Vanessa?
I don't know what I'm talking about. So obviously there's two killers, and then through the franchise, which I don't know if we'll get on to talk about maybe briefly at the end, they continue that there tends to be more than one killer. But certainly, you know, when this came out, that was a new element to the slasher, the fact that you had this whodunit. And as a big fan of whodunits, as we've spoken about before, love kind of like Murder, She Wrote and everything back in the day, that probably added an extra element for me. That whole, you're thinking through the whole thing, who might it actually be? As well as the awesomeness of the like whole movie. Because I think
you know, I think generally, you know, you had a handful of slashers, you know, late 70s, early sort of 80s slashers that did, you know, have that mysterious killer, and it was revealed to be somebody, and but generally they weren't sort of anybody who was necessarily part of the plot or part of the ensemble, which I think is where Scream makes the really big sort of difference to that. You know, you've obviously got, you know, Mrs. Voorhees in the original Friday the 13th. You've got Angela in Sleepaway Camp and stuff like that, which might be kind of some exceptions to that rule, but it wasn't, the whodunit element was never really a big part of the slasher sort of legacy, I suppose.
No,
it is a really fascinating little twist to the story. But I mean, when did you first come across Scream?
It must have been when it came out in video. So what, 97 probably? If it was out on if it was released in 1996, I'm sure, because we're going back to like video shop days, which I'm quite looking forward to talking about as well. I'm pretty sure it would have been the following year. So I would have been about 12, 13.
Yeah, I mean, it came out in the States around sort of Christmas time, I think 96.
Okay, maybe
so,
later then.
You know, back in the 90s, we would have been probably, you know, a good couple of months, 2-3 months behind the States at that point. In terms of release date. So yeah, I mean, by the time it dropped on video, I would imagine it would be, you know, probably summer, autumn 97, I would have thought.
So I would have been 13 probably-ish, I think. Let me try and do some maths. Yeah, if it was autumn time, I probably was about 13. And I've probably mentioned before, but we used to go to the video shop every Friday night, and I think they used to do like rent 3 for the price of 2 or something like that. And we used to pick, like, as a family, like 2 or 3 movies to watch over like the Friday, Saturday, and Scream was one of my picks. And I don't remember why I picked it. Like, I don't remember, because obviously it was it wasn't probably well pre-internet, but if it was like, if I had the internet, I didn't really know what the internet was or anything. So it must have just been either the video case that made me want to see it, or maybe there was some chat at school about it, but I honestly can't remember. And thinking about it, I mean, it was an 18. But I think I've said before, my mum and dad were never that fussed about us watching stuff, because I think they just thought, it's just a daft horror movie, basically. Was it an 18, actually?
It was, yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't be an 18 if it came out now. If it came out now, no. I think it would be a 15.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we got it. And do you know the funny thing is, the first time I watched it, I did really enjoy it. But I've grown to love it even more. Like, the older I've got, the more I've rewatched it, the kind of nostalgia associated with it. And with the 90s, like I've said before, I love a lot of 90s movies. I think the 90s was the last truly great decade. Since then, things haven't been so good. So maybe there is and of course I was at an age where, you know, stuff did become important to me. So I would say I really enjoyed it when I first watched, but definitely over the years, I've come to appreciate it a lot more.
I mean, just to point out to listeners, just in case they can hear, that is probably that if you can hear it, it's Vanessa's dog George
George, sorry.
snoring
I'm
in
in
the
a different
background.
I'm in a different room to do the podcast. So the dog, which I normally shut the
Yeah.
door, but I'm in the living room, so I can't really shut him out his own living
Just
room.
so the listeners don't think it's me panting or anything, we'll just point it out. But he's there. He's enjoying the chat, obviously.
Obviously, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously we're a similar age, so I saw this when. So this dropped onto. Can you remember Sky box office? I don't know if you had Sky and that sort of time.
We didn't have, funnily enough, right? We didn't have Sky, but I used to do a lot of babysitting in my street, and I used to love babysitting somebody that had Sky because we never had Sky. So you got to what was the music channels I used to watch back in those days, which like
Yeah,
MTV and stuff. But yes, I do remember Sky. Well, what Sky box office was. Did you
yeah. So
pay for movies?
that was like a pay-per-view. So you
Yeah,
paid
yeah.
to watch a new release that hadn't. I think they sort of coincided with when they got video releases. And you basically rang up or you rang a number and then you could watch this film for like however many hours a day. But the beauty of it is you could record it as well. So my sister and her friend, they were having like a sleepover and they'd bought it or I think my sister had bought it and taped it ready for when they had the sleepover. And I just managed to watch it. And I mean, I'd seen bits of some slashers by this point. I'd seen a couple of the Friday the 13th, not Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street films. So that I think this is the first proper slasher I watched in its entirety. I would say, I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty
I
confident at
think
that.
when you were talking there, I realised I watched a bit of Hellraiser, which I wouldn't actually call a slasher, but I watched
No.
a bit of Hellraiser when I was at primary school at a sleepover at a friend's. But I think it was on in the background. We weren't really paying attention to it. So this was probably the first slasher and possibly first kind of proper horror movie that I actually sat and watched, like start to finish.
Yeah. I'd probably say the same actually. I think definitely there were films that I'd seen that were sort of horror adjacent to, to Terminator 2 and things like that. But this was definitely the first, if one of the first, if not the first, that I saw. I mean, this was. So I would have been, around 14, I think, at this stage when it sort of dropped onto said Sky box office. And yeah, I remember just being quite enthralled with it at the time, and really, it was something that I watched quite a lot because obviously we recorded it, so I could just watch it at my leisure then. And it was quite an early film, early sort of obsessive kind of film for me because and it just sort of opened up that rich history of horror. Not even having seen Halloween or Friday the 13th by that point, or not a good chunk of the Nightmare on Elm Street films and things like that. All these films that are sort of referenced in Scream, but knowing that I somehow sort of knew that legacy of those films and those slasher films that paved the way for this film, just from them being in the zeitgeist, I suppose. And yeah, it's definitely one of the films that really started me on my horror journey. Very much like yourself.
Yeah.
I got quite enthralled with this idea and this this sort of setup and the idea of a slasher film or a horror movie and how that is sort of played out in the real world almost in this film. That word that you don't like, meta. It is very much these people know what we know. It's not
Yeah.
like they're just oblivious to the world of horror cinema. They know about everything that we know about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because they reference so many horror films in Scream that I hadn't seen, after this, I did seek them out. After this, I very much was drawn to the horror section of the video shop, looking for things like Halloween and Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Exorcist. I watched a lot of these movies at sleepovers and stuff following Scream, even things that weren't referenced like Candyman, and which I also love. It just kind of made me go, oh, I need to watch more of these films. So I would say it definitely started the kind of love that I have today for the genre, definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, a good number of the films that we're discussing on this Mega Duel season, well, no, not really a good deal. I mean, there are probably only two of the directors really are proper, what I would say, are horror directors. And obviously Wes Craven is one of them. I mean, generally, sort of Wes Craven. Do you like all of his film or a lot of his films? Have you seen a lot of his back catalogue and everything up to this
Yeah.
point?
Nightmare on Elm Street is probably in my top 3 horrors of all time. Last House on the Left is obviously a very difficult movie, but it's one that I think is fantastic at what it's trying to do. Some of the Scream sequels, I really like, and then like more recently, I've sought out kind of more obscure things like The People Under the Stairs. I like The Hills Have Eyes. So yeah, I would say Wes Craven is probably one of my favourite horror directors. And he just, when, obviously he's passed away now, but when you hear about him, when you hear interviews about he seems like a really nice guy. Like he seems like one of these people, maybe a wee bit like Stephen King or something, who puts all the kind of horror and horrible stuff in their art, but as a person isn't really like that at all. Like a lot of horror fans, like quite a sweet, nice person from what I've heard, obviously. So I would say I'm a big Wes Craven fan. Although I've not seen is it The Serpent and the Rainbow?
Oh, that's a film that is. Wow.
Yeah, I need to get onto that. That's a blind spot for me. So I've not seen everything that he's done, but everything that I have seen that he has done, I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, there's not many directors and not many horror directors either that have, reignited a genre twice in their career. There was quite an obvious sort of slump after your Halloweens and your Friday 13th. Mid 80s, everybody was starting to get tired of the slasher sort of subgenre.
Yeah.
And then he comes along with Nightmare on Elm Street, which takes everything up a notch and really sort of redefines what you can do with this slasher principle, and adding in the more sort of supernatural elements of it. And then midnight, 10 years later, I mean, obviously he does kind of do that with New Nightmare, but it wasn't as popular as Scream, and Scream really sort of again redefined not just the horror genre and the slasher genre, but cinema really. At this point, it sort of defined what you can do, and and this sort of merging of, obviously we've got Kevin Williamson, who's the script writer, who was a huge part of the 90s. He's a very prolific screenwriter, and I think is it Dawson's Creek he wrote, and would go on to write. I know what he did last summer, The Faculty, and films like that, and the sequels to this film, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I think, as important as Wes Craven is to this film, I think Kevin Williamson's involvement is equally as important to why this film was such a success.
I would totally agree. I think the way Kevin Williamson wrote, and I mean, I don't know if people, like kids, actually spoke like that, to be fair. I don't know if I really remember people speaking like that, but everybody loved the way that kids in Dawson's Creek spoke. Yeah. And then he carried that into this movie. And then I think did he do H2O as well, which is something that I think owes a lot to Scream, like The Faculty, and I Know What You Did Last Summer. Like these films all came about, I think, as a result of Scream. And I think just the Wes Craven, Kevin Williamson double act worked really, really well. And they did it again. Did they do it again in one of the sequels? Was it Scream 2 or Scream 4?
Scream, I think Williamson wrote Scream 2, didn't he? And Scream 4, I
Right.
think. I don't think he
Right,
wrote
okay.
3, if I remember rightly, but I could be wrong on that. Let me have a quick look, a bit of live Googling for you here, folks. Yeah, no, he didn't write
Yeah.
3.
Which is interesting because I would say out of those four, three is probably the weakest. So it's interesting that he obviously wasn't involved in that one. But no, I think Kevin Williamson is a big part of why Scream was so successful. And like you mentioned about New Nightmare, and I think now people go back and watch New Nightmare slightly differently. Like I think it's
Yeah.
now more
I
highly
don't
appraised than it was at the time.
I don't think the world was ready for it in 94
No, no,
at
no.
all. And I think not in that, maybe not in that kind of sort of setup. I think it came to, you're only sort of, I think a couple of years, 2 or 3 years shy of Freddy's Dead as well. And I think people hadn't
Yeah,
quite sort of gotten over that and refound their love for the Nightmare on Elm Street, the retrospective love for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise by that point. I think had that
yeah.
film come out, between sort of Scream and the end of the millennium, it would have been a lot more successful at the box office. I mean, it was critically very, very much appreciated, but box office wise, people were just done with Freddy at that point, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think Scream was different because it was doing something similar, but with like a whole new cast, a whole
Yeah,
new concept. And
but I
like you
don't
said, I
think
think
it. I don't think it didn't do it at the expense of the horror. And I
no.
think when you look at New Nightmare, there's some horrific parts in it and stuff, but it's a very low body count. There is
Mm,
literally, I think, two deaths in that film, whereas Scream is sort of going that meta route, but it's also giving you everything that you know and love from slasher films as well.
yeah. Although actually, see when you rewatch it, it's got a body count. It's not the highest
Oh
body
no,
count
no, not at all. No.
ever. I mean, you've got the two that die. I mean, obviously, we'll probably talk about some of the set pieces, but you've got the two that die near the start. Then you've got a bit of a lull
Hmm.
before the principal
Yeah.
dies. And then you've got a couple of folk dying in the kind of finale, the final act. But apparently, the reason that they killed, I was going to call them the Fawns, Henry
Henry Winkler.
Henry Winkler, was because they thought there was too much of a gap.
Yeah.
Because obviously Sydney gets the phone call and there's all of that, but nobody actually gets killed in that kind of section. So I think that's why they decide, we have to have, and that death's obviously kind of done pretty much off screen
Yeah.
as well. So although it has got a number of deaths, and there's definitely a lot of horror in it, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well, but the body count is nowhere near as high as some, other slashers,
Yeah.
like that, especially maybe more recently. That because actually thinking back to things like Halloween and stuff, there's probably not a massively high body count actually.
I don't know. It's more than 2 though.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But now you see stuff where there's like, I mean, what was that, Halloween Kills or something, where like 30 people get killed like the first like 20 minutes or whatever. I think
Yeah.
I think it's the right amount though, because if you have death, you've got no time to catch your breath and get to know the characters in between. Whereas in Scream, you start off with a very horrific set piece, and then for quite a while you are just getting to know the characters, and you need to get to know them, because it would be absolutely rubbish if they just brought in a killer that from outside at the end, who you had no idea about. So you need to spend a little bit of time, I think, getting to know all these characters, so you can start going, is it him or is it her, or is it, all that stuff in the meantime.
I mean, in terms of like the dialogue and stuff, because obviously it is very, you watch something like Dawson's Creek, and it's very sort of cringy teenage love story kind of dialogue. And there's a fair bit of that in this at points. But I think a lot of that sort of comes from, and I think when you watch it then again, obviously knowing what we know by the end of the film, a lot of that sort of line, a lot of those cheesy lines really come from Billy and Sydney and their interactions and stuff. But then you see it obviously with a different perspective once you rewatch the film, or once you've got a good idea of what's going on and what his sort of motives are,
Aye.
and I think that's a very clever thing that Williamson does with the script, because he is, he's Billy at the end of the day has got an end game. He's working to manipulate Sydney at various points during the film, and he's using, whether he's using references to films, and we get that through the entire Scream franchise. That everybody's referencing films, not just horror films, to make their point. And I think it's so well done, and so to a point that it just works fantastically well. And I think with Craven's direction, it creates this perfect storm for the mid-90s, really,
Yeah.
of smulchy teenage stories with pure horror. And I mean, I think we've got to start, really, when we dissect this film, with the opening, which is, I mean, I would say it's definitely in my top 5 of movie openings.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's high up there for me. It's probably, well, I mean, given it's my favorite horror movie, it probably is my favorite horror movie opening. Although I've got a lot of love for the opening of the first Final Destination movie as well, which came just a few years later. But it's absolutely perfect. I mean, it's only about 12 minutes long, I think. And if you were watching that at like a film festival as like a short, which it could just exist
Yeah.
on its own, you would be absolutely blown away by it. And of course, at the time, there was all this stuff about Drew Barrymore being on the poster, Drew Barrymore being probably the biggest star, at least the biggest movie star. Obviously, Neve Campbell at the time had been in Party of Five, and obviously Courtney Cox had been in Friends, and a lot of them maybe had like TV careers, but she was the biggest kind of movie star, and they did, the Psycho thing, getting rid of her very early on, which apparently people didn't really know was going to happen. And I mean, it's like
But then
watching
I
it
think
again.
it's fair to say that she was very much in a lull in her career at this point, wasn't she?
She was, but she'd been in such massive movies, I think, when she was young, that she was still a massive star, even if she hadn't done a lot for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose yes, she's a big name for what would probably have been considered at the time a low budget horror movie.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, she'd been in ET.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but
like,
then also the year before she'd had about a 5-minute role in Batman Forever. So,
yeah,
it's a bit of a come
that's
down.
that's fair. And what else? She'd done Firestarter by this point as well, hadn't she?
Firestarter, yeah, Poison Ivy.
Yeah. But I mean, I know what you mean. She probably then became bigger again and started to do more stuff after Scream, but she was still kind of the headline name. So it very much was that kind of
She was still big enough
show.
to be on the poster, yeah.
Exactly. So I think, it was a shock her getting killed very early on, but I think it was also a shock how visceral it is. I mean, it's you see her obviously being hung up with her guts hanging out in every room, which is absolutely horrible. But the added element is her poor parents come back and find her, and you've got that horrible bit where her mum's on the phone and she can hear her, where she goes, Casey, baby. It's horrible. It's horrendous. It's like,
it is.
It's so heartbreaking because they're just a few minutes too late, and she can hear her. She can barely talk because I think her fucking vocal cords are away at that point. And it's absolutely, and the music as well that's used at that point. I mean, the score through this entire movie, I think, is fantastic. Like, I'm not just talking about the needle drops, but the actual stuff that was written for the film. And the music that gets used in that first bit when our mum's, oh my God, I just think it's absolutely phenomenal.
It is. Well, I mean, everything leading up to that, we get. There's no sort of pomp and circumstance at the start of the film. We are literally into the film, phone ringing into the film. That's it. We're not really sort of introduced to anybody. There's no nothing. And I mean, a lot of slasher films, a lot of horror films up until this point really had a sort of a very sort of cold open, and you'd get your first kill, or you kind of set up to what we're going to see. But I don't think we're never. There's very little in terms of slasher films in particular that go so deep into their opening kill or opening
Yeah.
scene, and how much is sort of set up. And we learn very quickly that this is a world where people know about horror films, and they know about the horror films that we know about.
Yeah.
And it's all very, it's very modern for mid 90s. It's phones that don't have cords on them. It's not, this isn't When a Stranger Calls. It's a girl who is on her own, and she's walking about the house because she's got a portable telephone,
Yeah.
which was the height of sophistication mid 90s. If you had a phone that didn't have a cord on it, you were something else.
Absolutely. But I think as well, like this idea of being home alone and getting a phone call on the house phone, there's something scarier about that, I think, than somebody phoning you on your mobile. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but I remember like being home alone when I was young. And I don't know if I've mentioned before, but my dad, grown up, he's retired now, was a defense lawyer. And sometimes some of his nut job clients would phone the house,
Hmm.
like when you were home alone. And some of them were like, they had obviously issues and whatever, but the idea of you being kind of like young in the house by yourself and somebody like almost breaking your personal barrier or something by
Yeah,
phoning the
yeah,
house
yeah, yeah.
phone. Do
Oh
you know
God,
what
yeah.
I mean? Like, and I think there's just something even more horrible about that than somebody doing the same thing on your mobile phone. Plus, at the end of the day, if you get a crank call or something on your mobile phone, you can just block the number now straight away. Like, there's
Yeah.
no way they can, but you can't do that in a house phone. And your parents might phone or whatever, so you can't take the phone off the hook or whatever and just not let somebody phone, so you're kind of trapped
Mm.
in a way. And I think that comes across so well the more into that scene you get, because originally she's like, oh, you've got a wrong number, hangs up,
Hmm.
he phones back again, and then
Yeah.
you've got this popcorn going on fire at the same time, which is just works like super well as well. Like, it's just fantastic.
I think it's the escalation of that scene, isn't it? That just
Mm-hmm.
keeps going, because yes, you get that playfulness, you get the annoyance that he keeps calling back and wanting to continue the conversation, and she starts to get annoyed with that, and then he drops this line of "I want to know who I'm looking at," and that takes it up a notch.
Yeah,
But then it's
changes the
like
tone.
it, yeah, changes the tone, and then this line, and I remember it at the time really unnerving me. And I wouldn't say that I'm somebody who's scared easily. Even at 14, I wasn't somebody who really got scared watching horror films. But the line, "I want to see what your insides look like,"
Yeah,
is just so unnerving at that point, because like I say, it's that escalation. It doesn't go, it doesn't sort of start with a bit of playfulness and straight to "I want to see what your insides look like." It's, "I want to know how I'm looking at," and him trying to cover that up. But
yeah,
then it's like, well, what do you want from me? What is the point of this? And it's like, the point is, I want to fucking kill you. And
yeah,
and by that point, it's like, well, you're not really interested in playing a game, then, are you? But obviously, we carry on down this pretense of them wanting to play this game and this sort of quiz about horror films and stuff. And it's and this sort of zeitgeisty stuff that's sort of plopped in that scene as well, with when she says who's there, and she's like, don't you watch horror films? You should never say who's there. Don't you know what happens to people who say who's there and stuff?" And it's,
yeah,
that carries on through the film, which is fantastic. When we get to the rules and all that sort of stuff, it's and then this sort of revelation that he knows everything about her, and he knows, she
yeah,
says, I've got a boyfriend, and he's big, and he'll kick your ass and all that sort of thing. And she's sort of desperate to get this guy to listen, to leave her alone. And then it's like, say his name wouldn't be Steve, would it? And then you're like,
yeah,
fuck, this is like, oh,
yeah.
shit.
Well, you know that she even knows the killer because right at the end of that scene where she pulls off the mask before she dies, there's a look of recognition on her face. So you know at that point it's going to be somebody in the movie. It's not just going to be this unknown force or, you know, Freddy, Jason type character. It's somebody that she knows who it is. But no, you're right. The whole escalation of the scene. I mean, I went to see this in the cinema for the first time in 2021.
Wow.
So it must have been its 25th anniversary. And I think it wasn't long before Scream 5 or 5 Cream or
All
whatever the
right.
hell you call it came out. So
Five
they did
Cream,
a
yeah.
re-release, yeah. And Adam and I went to see it at the cinema, and it was a fantastic experience. First time I've ever seen it in the cinema, and everybody in the cinema seemed to absolutely love it. And I think there was a lot of people, obviously, kind of like our age, who had seen it before, but there were younger people there as well that might never have seen it. And everybody, you could tell, was just really enjoying it. And that initial set piece, like, it's even better watching it in the cinema. It's just like
Yeah.
absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I think it's, and that brutality in that opening
Yes.
scene, it's so, there's elements of sort of torture porn, or what would come to be sort of torture porn.
Yes. Yeah.
There's real torment in that opening scene. It's like a cat playing with a mouse.
Yes.
It is so unnerving, and like you said, it's so gory. I don't, you see the sort of, when you retrospectively look at like the 80s slashers and stuff, which are very gore, some of them are very gory,
Yeah.
but they still don't feel necessarily very real. Whereas Scream feels very real. There's little notes to some of the set pieces, particularly in the opening where Steve has been killed, and obviously his guts have been just flopped out on the floor. But he's sat there and they're steaming because of obviously it's warm body parts that have just been exposed to the work, the elements.
Yeah. It
You know,
looks real as well, because I think
yeah,
movies in the 70s and 80s, if there was blood, it quite often looked, I mean, obviously it was fake, but it
yeah,
quite often looked very fake. So there was an element that just didn't make it seem real. Whereas in Scream, the blood looks realistic. And in that
yeah.
opening scene where you see Steve and when you eventually see Casey hanging from the tree, it looks real.
Yeah,
It looks
it's
really real.
the harshness of it, like you said. The fact where I mean, she sees. We get this viewpoint where she sees her parents' car coming down the road. So she's, she's the end is in sight. She can make it to them, but the killer jumps out the window and attacks her, stabs her in the chest, which leads to this great little plot point that she can't scream. She can't shout out to her parents because A, she's been stabbed in the chest, and B, she's just been throttled by the killer. So she's
Yeah.
got nothing there. She can't shout for help despite being a number of meters away from the parents going in the house. It's just so brutal and so
Yes.
horrible, and you're like, oh my God, this is just terrible.
Yeah.
And then, like you say, she's on the phone. She's got the phone in her hand, and her mum can hear her last breaths, basically,
It's just
while she's being
horrendous.
stabbed. It's so horrendous. There's nothing. I
It's
can't think of any other, sort of classic slasher film where that kind of thing has happened, and the brutality of somebody being murdered. And I think it's very sort of, we're only a few years sort of removed from Columbine as well, and this sort of,
Yeah, this was pre-Columbine,
this
wasn't
was
it?
pre-Columbine,
Yeah,
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 and
yeah,
I
yeah.
think, and that's not suggesting that, anything like this would have influenced anybody involved in those terrible atrocities, but we hadn't really experienced anything like that mid
Whereas now,
90s.
probably like into the 2000s and later, we were
Yeah,
maybe a wee bit more jaded because some of the horrific things that actually
desensitized to
happened,
it, yeah.
like, yeah, like Columbine. And then obviously, not long after, you had things like 9/11 and stuff. So people were probably a bit more. But at the time, it was really shocking.
Mm.
And I think, like you said, just adding the parents in there, like normally in slasher movies, you don't get a chance to see how the death impacts the family because it moves on so quickly to like the next death or whatever. So you don't get to see that. And in this one, you get, and it's just when her mum says that on the phone, it's just like, oh my God. And even though you only see her parents for a couple of minutes, like it's all believable. They're believable characters. The way they act is absolutely believable in that kind of situation.
Yeah. Well, it's like, obviously we lose her dad at a certain point in that scene, and then he comes back and he's obviously found Steve at the back with, steaming away at the poolside kind of thing. And, there he's like, just get in the car, get down to the fucking Mackenzies and just ring the police for God's sake.
Yeah.
And then,
although that is a bit strange because at this point he doesn't know where Casey is. He knows that Steve's been murdered and he's sending his wife away on her own, which I don't know if that's just something you would do in the moment, maybe like get, and I know obviously, get down to the Mackenzies is obviously a reference to Halloween, but I did think you would probably want to stay together at that point, because at that point you don't know where
I mean, what would you be thinking at that point? You'd be just like,
knows, actually,
fucking get out of here. I'm going to find out what the fuck's going on, kind of thing.
Yeah, I suppose you wouldn't have a clue, but
it
no, I
leads
think
us
the
to
whole
this, and I
bit's
mean, this
perfect.
was always, and that's that moment when she gets out the door and screams, and we get this sort of fast zoom into Casey's body hanging from the fucking tree. Always bothered me. It always bothered me with this film because it is it's horrible. It's such a horrible image. And
Well, it's almost a wee bit like kind of biblical. It's almost like she's been like crucified, the way that she's hanging there. And then obviously it just cuts, like you said, you've got this really fast zoom in, the scream, and then it just cuts straight away. And of course, when the film was made, it wasn't even called Scream. I think they called it Scary Movie. Was the
it was the original title.
I'm really glad they changed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just absolutely perfect.
Yeah, and I think it's really something that sort of elevates it above other horrors of the same ilk as well. It's very much, there are not many slashers with this memorable sort of opening scenes, I don't think.
No.
There's films with memorable opening acts, maybe, but not, not to this degree. I think it really sets us up for, this is a different kind of slasher film.
Yeah.
There are no sort of, even, the classics, they're not as brutal as this.
No.
They don't affect you on an emotional level, I suppose, as much as this film.
It's probably the most emotional part of the whole movie, because actually watching it again yesterday, that scene I think affects you more emotionally than anything that subsequently happens. And because the tone shifts a little bit, it becomes a little bit more fun after that opening scene. Because of the dialogue and just the way the kids all interact with one another. It just, and then you've got like Dewey, who's a bit of a kind of funny character. The whole dynamic after that slightly shifts, which is a good thing, because if it had kept up like that through the whole movie, I think it would have been unbearable.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. I mean, we've, and I think there's part of me that thinks, how much more impact would that opening scene have had it not been Drew Barrymore? I think you've got the whole, you got the whole shock and awe of it being Drew Barrymore and her dying in the opening scene, which is great on one level, but how much more impact would that have had if we'd have had somebody who was a bit more, because Drew Barrymore would have been well known, and we would, most people will probably know Drew Barrymore's not a teenager at this point. But imagine that scene if that had had somebody who was very clearly a teenager as well.
Yeah.
And how much more that would have been elevated in terms of shock and awe. But then they maybe wouldn't have got away with that, I suppose.
I don't know if they would have got away with it, but also definitely back in the 90s and even in the 80s and stuff, they never had teenagers playing teenagers. Like we spoke about Dirty Dancing not long ago, and even Jennifer Grey, I think, was in her 20s when she filmed that. Stuff like Grease, like it's all people in their 30s, I think. Like, I don't know if it's changed.
Well, I don't think
now,
they were in the. I think not Matthew Lillard, Skeet Ulrich, I think, was in his 30s. I think he was the oldest member of the teenage cast. By this point, but we're also led to believe that Dewey's 25 as well at this point, which is seems a bit of a stretch. He may have been, actually, I don't know,
But he was 24 for a whole year.
he was 24 for a whole year, absolutely. Uh, but yeah, then we get, once we get past the opening scene, it does become a little bit more sort of standard in terms of what we're expecting from a slasher film, and the characters that are introduced. And we have this sort of cast of our sort of main teenagers, and we're obviously very quickly introduced to our final girl, or one of our final girls, I suppose, really for the franchise, in Neve Campbell, and and her boyfriend, which I don't know. I always find that scene a little bit icky. I don't know why.
It is icky. It's icky because, well, obviously she is older. She's not in her teens, Neve Campbell, at the time, but
Yeah.
she's supposed to be a teenage girl. And he makes a comment about like her night. She's wearing this night dress, which is quite kind of old fashioned. Like, I'm pretty sure like 16-year-old girls don't sleep in things like that anymore. But he makes a comment about it. And then he's obviously all that crap about I was watching The Exorcist and it made me think of you, and all the stuff about, and an R-rated NC-17 and blah blah blah. It is icky, and he is. I mean, it's when you watch it on a rewatch, you're like, of course he was always going to be the fucking killer because he's so creepy right from the get go,
Yeah.
and he's obviously trying to pressure her into sleeping with him, and she's obviously very reluctant to do so. And I love her. I mean, she's one of my favorite final. Like, if I had to do a top 5 final girl, she would be in it.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was watching it yesterday, I did think to myself, as much as I think she's a fantastic character, I think she's a believable character, I think it's a really good performance. If I was like a 16-year-old, I don't know if I'd want to be friends with her because she doesn't seem that much fun. And I don't mean because of the sex stuff.
Well, her
She
fucking mum's just been
very...
killed.
Well,
That's
no, her
why.
mum was killed a year. Her mum was killed a year ago. A year ago.
A year
right?
Brutally murdered, I might add, and raped. It's not like she's just fucking passed away suddenly.
I know, but I don't know. Like, I do love her as a character, but thinking about what I was like at 16, 17, I think I would be a bit like, oh, for fuck's sake, do we have to invite her? All she talks about is her dead mum. Well, she's not in it. Like, she's just not the way that maybe Tatum is, although Tatum annoys me a little bit as well, but she's just not that much fun. She's very, very serious. And I don't know if she's just playing it like that because, like, as an actor, I've seen her in loads of things and I think she's a good actor and I've seen her being interviewed and I think she seems like a really fun person, but she always plays Sydney, even in the sequels, as this very serious character. And it's sometimes a bit like, see if you got like a little bit of levity, it just might make her a little bit more, and like I do like her, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think out of all the Scream films, I think this is probably her weakest performance.
Right. Do you think
and that's not to say it's bad. It's not to say it's bad at all because she's a fine actress, Neve Campbell, and it works really well in the film, but I think she grows into the role a lot more in the sequels, even if some of the stories are a bit jaded at points. But I think she grows into that final girl role a lot better in the sequels. But again,
she gets more bitchy as well, I suppose, later on, whereas she's still quite, in inverted commas, innocent at this point, whereas she becomes a bit more kind of kick-ass later on. She becomes a wee bit more like self-assured and stuff. But I don't know if it's just leans so much into that like innocent, and like I'm not just talking about the sex stuff, right? Because if she doesn't want to have sex, that's fine, obviously, but I mean, she just doesn't even seem like she wants to get into like the partying or having a laugh with her friends. Like, she just seems very,
but then you would
very...
you would think as well, if she was that dead set against the sex stuff, and very clearly it's a very important thing for Billy Loomis at this point, then you would think that she would maybe say, well, maybe I'm not the person for you, kind of thing, or whatever. If that's, so high on your agenda, it's not going to happen. And, and I can't get what you say. I mean, the biggest sort of plot hole really with this film, I think, if and one criticism I would throw at it is, why the fuck is her dad going away on a business trip when it's literally the anniversary of her mum, 1 year
That is
anniversary of her mum being brutally murdered and
that is
leaving
a
her on her
very
own?
I mean, obviously you need it. You need a way to get him out the picture. But
Yeah.
could there not have been a better way, like a sick relative, maybe, or something like
Yeah.
oh, I really don't want to leave you on the anniversary of such a traumatic event, but your granny's on her deathbed or something.
Yeah.
You would believe that more than I'm just going for a jolly for a work conference. And we all know what work conferences are like. It's just an excuse for everybody to get shit faced and possibly get laid. So it's like, are you really going to leave your young daughter on the anniversary of her mum's death or something? I think you're right. They obviously needed a way to get him out the picture. So they've just
Mm.
written something in to get him out. But I think if he'd been called away to some kind of a family emergency, I think that probably would work
Yeah.
better. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've got this sort of great sort of little supporting cast really, and I think they are sort of the perfectly sort of archetypal slasher film kids as well.
Yeah.
You know, you've got the geek, you've got Randy, you've got the pretty boy in sort of Billy, you've got the sort of crazy kid in Stu, and you've got the the big-breasted sort of blonde in Tatum. Although she's not, she's not the dumb blonde that you probably get in most sort
No.
of 80s slashes. She's very much, I read somewhere, there was a description somewhere I read when I was sort of reading up bits and bobs, and she's the sort of spunky best friend of Sydney, which perfectly describes her, really.
It does perfectly describe her, but it does make me wonder, would they be friends actually? You've got this really spunky, fun lover, and obviously I know that Sydney had this traumatic thing happen, but it does make you go, would they be as close when their personalities are very, very different?
I
Although I
think they
suppose when
would.
you're
I
at
think
school,
a lot of my
yeah,
school friends had very different personalities to me, so I would say
I
so,
sup-
yeah.
maybe, do you know what it is though? Maybe I'm maybe looking at it as a 40-year-old. And when you're at school, you're friends with people, and sometimes you stay friends with them. And you
Yeah.
sometimes think when you're older, if I'd met you now, I don't know if we'd be as close.
Mm.
Because as you get older, you tend to drift towards people that are like you, that have the same likes as you,
Yeah.
that have the same political beliefs as you, etc., etc. Whereas when you're at school, so maybe I'm being a wee bit overly critical there. Yeah,
Yeah, because I
possibly.
don't think you need. I think you need that in your life. You need friends that don't necessarily have the same opinion to you or the same
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of personality as you. I had friends at school that I would say were absolute dickheads, but I was friends with them and I got on with them and I had a laugh with them.
Yeah.
But and I think she's very. I think she more than maybe some of the others in the supporting cast really sort of twists that archetype because she would in any other film of this genre she would be the stupid blonde, the stupid pretty girl of the group. And Rose McGowan's a very capable actress, I think, and a very underrated actress. And I think as stories sort of come out in very sort of recent years, and obviously this film was produced by the Weinsteins,
Yep.
and I don't think she's really had a fair shot at Hollywood and cinema on the whole because of that. But she's a very interesting character. I think she question, there's not many films where you would see the best friend of the main character questioning her beliefs and her opinions on things. There's a very key scene in the middle of this film where she doubts the the that Cotton Weir is guilty of killing her mum, and she
Is that when she
raises that
talks
with her.
about Richard Gere?
Yes, you only hear, yeah, you can only hear the story about the Richard Gere and the gerbil so many times without believing it. But it's a very good point, and it's a very smart and grown up
Yeah.
opinion of what's happening. And she's one of my favorite characters in this film. I think Tatum. You
She
know,
annoys me a wee bit, but I don't know if that's just an age thing because I'm like, she's just a silly young lassie. So maybe that's just I'm getting old and grumpy kind of thing. But you're right, she does subvert the trope of the, like you said, the kind of big breasted blonde that Sydney talks about when she's talking about the tropes in horror movies. So that's possibly intentional, but yeah.
And then, it's obviously we've got Jamie Kennedy who's perfectly cast as the sort of horror nut.
He's us.
He's us.
He's
Yeah,
us.
he's absolutely us. He's pointing out everything that everybody's doing wrong and everything should be thinking about, and he knows who the killer is halfway through the film, and he says it. It's Billy. Um,
And he loves Sydney. He's obviously got this kind of
yeah.
unrequited
Oh yeah.
love, which is very sweet, because I think everybody can relate to being young and having this kind of mad crush on somebody. And I think, yeah, Jamie Kennedy's fantastic. He's probably one of my favourite characters in it.
Mm. And Matthew Lillard is just.
Oh, he is maybe the best thing, actually. The more you watch it, he's
Mm.
so unhit. I mean, watching it for the second, even and third time, it's like it was so obvious it was him and Billy, like right from the start. The way
Yeah.
he acts, like, and he's so over the top, and he's so good at that visual act, and he's got this massive mouth and the way that he says things, and he's always fantastic. I
We'll
absolutely love
get
him.
to it when we talk about the finale, but I think he's just fucking on another level
He
in
steals the finale.
that
Yeah,
finale is fucking brilliant.
he steals
Um,
it.
but I mean, yeah, and then obviously David Arquette and Courtney Cox play our sort of slightly older, sort of cast members, and I mean I suppose that's another sort of strong point for this film because most slashers would have you sort of identifying with, or teenagers identifying with the teenage characters. Whereas
Yeah.
here you've got two characters who are that little bit older or portrayed as being that little bit older that a slightly older audience can identify with, in Gale Weathers and Dewey. And because he says he's 25, doesn't he? But that still doesn't feel quite right for this time in his life.
No.
But I mean, Courtney Cox, for all intents and purposes, is probably the biggest name in this film because by
Yeah,
this
and
point she's a couple of years into Friends, isn't she? And very much acting against type. A lot of the films.
yes,
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't bring this up on our recent roundtable, to be fair. But
it's a good shout, actually. Yeah.
she was a few of the films that I've seen her in. She very much plays that sort of light, bubbly, um, female lead co-star kind of characters. And even in Friends, especially at this point, Monica wasn't the neurotic kind of delight that we sort of grew to love in the vast, expanse of Friends series and stuff. The early sort of series, first couple of series, she was not quite what she became, but she was a very sort of lovable character and somebody you could get on board with. Where here she is playing a bitch. She's an absolute bitch in the first
She
part of the
is.
film.
Do you know why I maybe didn't bring her up when we did that round table? Because she gets softer
Yeah.
throughout this film, and through the rest of the franchise, she becomes softer. So when I'm looking back on Gale Weathers now, I'm probably thinking of her over the course of like what 5 or 6 movies. But you're absolutely right. In the first film, especially towards the beginning, she's a bitch. She's out for herself. She treats her cameraman horrifically. Poor guy, just trying. All she does is fucking fat shame him and have a go at him constantly.
Yeah.
All she cares about is her own career. Even the bit where she says about, oh, I could get an innocent man off, think what that would do to my book sales.
Yeah.
She's in the face of this young girl who's going through a lot of traumatic events, not caring about it. I mean, that was very much of its time, this idea of the press intruding on people's lives. And it's changed somewhat, I think, recently. But back in the 90s, you had all the stuff about the paparazzi.
Yeah.
Obviously, I can't remember when Princess Diana died. When was that? Mid-90s?
97. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was just a year later where, you had the press intruding so much in somebody's life effectively killed them. And you did have all this stuff about like people hiding in bushes to try and get pictures of people and all the rest of it. So I think that element's very much of its time, but she's fantastic in it, because when I saw it, I had only seen her in Friends. It's only since that I've seen her in other stuff. And I think she was really keen, from what I've kind of listened to in podcasts and read about the movie, she was keen to play a bitchy character to show that she could do something different to Friends. And it's quite sad, I think, watching it back now, because her and Dewey have such good chemistry.
Oh, it's brilliant.
And obviously knowing that they did get married, they did actually fall in love, and then obviously subsequently they've got divorced. It's kind of sad, like kind of bittersweet almost, maybe watching it now.
Yeah, but I
That
think they
makes
have a good
sense.
it was quite an amicable divorce, wasn't it? I think
Yeah,
they were,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I mean, just that sort of, you get this sort of thread with Dewey and with Gail, that they're, that she's very much trying to flirt with him to get the information and stuff. But then by the time we get to, the final act, and this great conversation that they have as they're walking down to sort of find out what this car is about, and they identify with each other because they both, they're sort of bonding about not being taken seriously within their chosen professions. She's not taken seriously because she's seen as this sort of hack journalist who, is looks for the sensationalist stories and things like that, and he's not taken seriously as a proper sort of police officer. And you learn to sort of believe that by that point, that they're sort of bonding with each other, and that sort of respect and admiration for each other is genuine, which you don't feel for most of the film, that you're going to have that feeling about the Gale Weathers character. And it's a really sweet moment by the time we get to that, I think. And it shows just how good their chemistry is at this point.
Aye, no, their chemistry is fantastic, and David Arquette's character. I mean, it's really funny the stuff with him and Tatum, when Tatum's like,
What did
obviously
Mom
like
tell you?
the younger sister. The only thing is, right, see, watching Dewey, and especially in this movie, where like the Daft Wee theme that plays when Dewey's about and whatever, I can't stop thinking about the guy in Scary Movie that's obviously setting him up a little bit.
Doofy, yeah.
Yeah. But I think, yeah, they have got great chemistry, and they are characters that slightly older people are supposed to identify with. Although Courtney Cox must have been, what age was she in this?
She was quite old, I think. I mean, she was born what? Let's have a look. She was. She was born in 64, so she'd have been 30, just over 30
Oh,
by
right,
this point.
okay. Right, okay. So, because I thought her and Neve Campbell were maybe closer in age, but they wouldn't be actually. Neve Campbell
No.
would have been in her early 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. But no, I think they are fantastic, and I think you need, if you spend all your time just with the high school kids, I don't think that would have worked. So I think they do work as this slightly different element that people can relate to. So yeah, I think they're a great addition to it.
Absolutely. And I think you've got a few sort of minor roles within this. I mean, as we touched on, you've got the fonts. So you've got
Fonts.
Henry Winkler playing this sort of touchy-feely principal that sort of starts off, and you kind of, it's very quite unnerving, that moment, because it is played on um quite prominently. He, when Sydney comes in and he sort of touches her face, doesn't he?
A beard.
At that point, and you get the reaction from the sheriff as well, who's like, I think it's there to sort of promote a bit of a red herring, I suppose, to the story at that point. But it's very, and he said, even when he says about the when we sort of cut to the outside of the school, before we meet the ensemble properly, and he says, "Don't forget your principal loves you," and it's like, everything about that character is supposed to be a bit off, I think.
I think that's intentional though, because I think
Yeah.
it's the same reason that most of the men in this movie wear black boots and black shoes, because you're
Yes.
supposed to think that any of them could be the killer, and I think that's exactly what they're doing with the Fonz. I
Yeah.
think he is supposed to be in the frame at that point anyway, although obviously he gets killed off quite early on in the kind of
Yeah,
third act of the movie.
but then we still, then we get this, you get everything up to a point. You get this sort of very sort of loving, affectionate kind of principal and that. And then when he gets these two kids in who have been running
Oh
through the
yeah,
school with the mask on and stuff, and he goes proper fucking psycho on them pretty much. He's
yeah.
like, I should cut out your insides. And he's got the fucking no, the noise, the sound design on those scissors when he's like just sort of clipping them in front of their faces and stuff
Yeah.
is just fantastic. And it's like, it's obviously meant to sort of throw you a little bit before we get his death, which is, like you say, that it's probably our sort of second. Well, it's the second death of or third death of the film.
Third death, yeah, yeah.
And yeah, great. It's such a great little moment. Lots of sort of horror pastiches in that section with the killer coming from the door, and we get these sort of moments where our attention is diverted to different areas in the scene before it's revealed that the killer's behind the door, and even a cameo from Wes Craven as
Oh yes, Fred.
as Fred the janitor, yeah, in his Freddy Krueger sweater as well.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I love stuff like that. I love
Yeah.
like that bit, like the stuff about the Mackenzies, like these little in joke Easter eggy bits. I do very much appreciate. Sorry,
Oh,
George
yeah.
is still snoring, by the way, if you're
It's
wondering.
all right.
He's
Yeah,
not,
I was
he's
going to
not
point it out
stopped.
that he's not stopped. That it's
He's
it's
not
still not.
stopped. He's not. He's
It's
not
still
stopped.
not me gasping for air kind of thing. But yeah, we get throughout the film we get so much more sort of interaction between the characters than probably most slashers really. I think that's down to that sort of whodunit element of it. We get this scene in the video shop with Stu and Randy talking about who it could be, and Billy turns up, and again, more references to classic slasher films and horror films, and about this sort of clinging on to the edge of the rules of horror films and stuff. It all keeps everything moving so nicely in the film before we get to the final act, which is the house party, classic sort of almost a classic trope of sort of horror films. We've got these teenagers all in one location, and
It's a long final act as well. Like I
it's
didn't
yeah,
realize it's like 45 minutes of the movie is in that house at the end, and it's. I mean, we talked about how amazing this beginning of this movie is,
yeah.
but the end. I mean, that whole final act is fine. I mean, I like everything in the middle, obviously, as well, but the final act is fantastic.
Mm. And again, you don't always get something so well sort of crafted, because we're still throwing in the red herrings at this point. We're still sort of, you still got to sort of keep the story moving with kills as well. We get this absolutely incredibly creative death scene for Tatum and
Oh
Rose
yeah.
McGowan, which is just, it's so kind of almost sort of over the top, but it sort of highlights a point really that is there throughout the film, which is, we've not got an unstoppable killer at this point. We even in the opening scene, there's a couple of points where Casey gets the best of the killer, and in this scene with Tatum's death, she's throwing the bottles at him and slamming the fridge door in his face, and it's something that you don't really sort of see in slasher films. It's another
No.
interesting little element that we get, but that fucking just. I mean, I don't think it would happen because I don't think garage doors are that strong. But the visuals of that thing are just.
I don't think that I was thinking about that. I mean, I would never get through a fucking cat flap or whatever the fuck it's supposed to be anyway. But obviously Rose McGowan is supposed to be fairly petite, but I'm not sure if it would work. But it's a great set piece.
Yeah,
It's
well,
fantastic.
I mean, it is a very big cat flap for starters. It's
Actually, yeah, it's
incredibly.
probably big enough for a dog.
Well, I mean, she does get through. I mean, you could argue she probably could have fucking got through that, to be fair, because to be fair, she's got both her shoulders through near enough, and she's quite ample chested as well, and they're both through the gateway as well.
Yeah, if you can get your shoulders through, you can probably get your hips through. That's fair enough, actually. Yeah, I wasn't going to
But
mention her boobs.
it's a great visual. Well, you know, it's a slasher film. It's still got room for, we don't get any full frontal
Nudity.
nudity in this, but we get some quite epic nips in that scene, is all I will say. But it's still a great visual. It's such a great idea for a kill, really, and it harkens back to your Friday the 13th and stuff like that, really.
Yeah.
Which is it, and it is epic and it is brutal as well. You get this sort of last shot of her squished up against the top of the garage door, which is just fantastic. But yeah, and I think it's clever in that it doesn't. When you rewatch the film, you obviously know that Billy turns up just after this, and that Stu goes to get a beer just before this. So, but you don't know, that's not something that you potentially notice when you're watching the film for the first time. It's so good at throwing your attention away, and it mixes in the sort of red herrings that aren't red herrings because they are the killers. It's so epically sort of written as a that whodunit element, I suppose.
Well, you don't think it's going to be Billy because Billy's already arrested. So you think, well, it's a red herring. You don't, like you say, realise it's a double red herring. But then, of course, you're not expecting it to be two. After Scream, when you watch the sequels, you're expecting it to be two. But in the original film, you're definitely not expecting that. But then, like, when you watch it again, you're like, the two of them are clearly unhinged from the start. But it still works. And like you said, when you watch it for the first time, you don't know, and you are really shocked at what actually ends up happening.
Yeah, and I think you get to that point where obviously Billy turns up, and they have sex, and it's a very important moment in the film because we're learning just before that you don't have sex in a horror film, you're going to die. It's a very big plot point in the fact that she doesn't want to have sex and she's a virgin and all that sort of stuff that is thrown in the early parts of the film, and is a big it's portrayed as a big moment.
Love it and I hate it. I love the fact that it subverts the trope that she isn't a virgin. And just to point out, like, virginity is a total social construct. It doesn't actually make sense when you really think about it. But like, it subverts the fact that you have sex, you die, because she obviously doesn't. She's the final girl, she lives. So I love that.
Yeah.
But I hate the fact that she ends up having sex for the first time with
A killer,
a fucking psychopath. Yeah. So it's like, I love it and I hate. I love the fact that it subverts the trope, but the character, I hate the fact that she's then going to be like, okay, the first time I had sex was with this fucking psycho who was killing everyone and who killed my mum, because obviously it transpires not only is he killing all these other people, but it was him that was responsible for her mother getting killed in the first place.
Yeah, and I mean, again, the script sort of throws in this great little throw off that she has sex with Billy, and then Billy is killed right in front of her, and you don't doubt it. There's no point in that scene that you doubt it. But even before he's killed, it throws in that little nugget of, is it him?
When she's asking about the phone call.
Yeah, and he's like, you still don't think it was me, do you? And then her reaction is almost like, oh my God, it is actually you. And then we're presented with Ghostface behind him and stabs him, kills him. And, we carry on the story and you don't think anything more of it. Even the point where he reappears, miraculously surviving this kill. You don't doubt it for a second. You're like,
no.
Oh my God, he's still alive and he's going to save the day or something like that. But when we go again, it's pure horror set pieces, pure slasher set pieces at this point with with poor old Kenny getting killed in the in the van, and this blood on the van, and Dewey and Gale turning back up, Dewey getting stabbed. And that point we think, he's dead, and even to that point where we find out who the actual killers are, you don't know, and it perfectly sort of portrays that Sydney doesn't know, because at this point she knows the killer is outside, and Randy and Stu both turn up and blaming each other or accusing
Yeah.
each other, and
She doesn't have a
yeah,
clue at that point.
no, exactly. And then this really fantastic reveal when Billy turns back up alive and shoots Randy, and the brilliant line, "We all go a little mad sometimes."
Oh, it's fantastic.
Oh, and that's it. But that's it. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to know at that point. And if you've got any indication of horror history, you know from that point on, without him even, saying what he's referencing, that this is it. This is where we're going. And then Stu revealed as his co-conspirator, which just blows everything out of the water, because you're not expecting it. You are expecting in any whodunit a killer. There's a
Yeah,
handful of whodunits where there's two people doing the crime, but here it just blows your socks off completely.
absolutely. Because well, I love that line, and obviously he explains what that line's from, which in some ways I'm like, oh, maybe it would be better if you didn't. But then a lot of the people watching the movie at the time wouldn't have seen Psycho. And then, as you say, from there on in, and then you get this just fucking unhinged shit from Stu, which I just love from this point to the end of the movie. It's just fucking crazy, and it's amazing because Billy is still kind of calculated and cold, and he has got a motive, even though the motive's not great. He has got a motive for what he's doing and what he's done. Whereas Stu's just like
Yeah, well,
pure
I mean, I
pressure.
did. We're both members of the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and I remember a couple of years ago, I sort of made a post about that. I think he's the much more disturbing killer of the franchise, because he doesn't. He's almost a bit sort of Michael Myers. He doesn't have a motive, and that makes it more unnerving for me, because and a lot of people sort of shot me down and said, it's peer pressure. He's sort of bullied into it by by Billy, but I think it takes a lot to freaking be bullied into something as
No,
extreme as this.
he's a
He's just,
psychopath.
yeah, he's a psychopath. He's a pure psychopath. And even the point where, you get the reaction from Sid as well, but you get it from Stu, the reaction when Billy tells her about the fact that his mum was sleeping with his dad, or her mum was sleeping with his dad, and the shock on his face, but there's almost like, and Stu's almost like, well, you didn't fucking tell me that. It's like, I thought we were just doing this because we like fucking killing people. It's so disturbing. I think that the whole sort of Stu aspect of why he's doing it, or his involvement in the killings. And I always think it's a shame, and like I said, we'll get onto the sort of legacy and the films that followed, but I always think it's a shame that it's never been that's never been sort of played into, and Stu's always been sort of second fiddle to Billy as part of this franchise.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I agree with that, and I think they're both psychopaths, but Billy does have a kind of reason. He's obviously blamed Sydney's mum for what happened to his family, and then that is, as you say, going into the sequels, that's explored kind of further. Whereas Stu is just kind of left there with a TV in his head,
yeah.
and that's kind of
Well,
it.
he's almost like a sort of modern sort of incel, I suppose, in
Mm.
terms of the that he's that character that that critics of horror and slashers kind of expect of people who watch horror films and slasher films.
Yeah.
They think that Child's Play and various other films encourage people to kill people, and I think Stu is kind of that personification of these sort of bizarre reasonings that people have, like heavy metal and Ozzy Osbourne, or Marilyn Manson encourage people to do horrible things and stuff. He's almost the personification of that in this film, I think.
Yes, but the whole kind of peer pressure thing, I mean, it makes me think of, and I know I talk about this all the time, and I've even mentioned it in this podcast already, but like when you've got bullies in Stephen King, so like in It, you've got Henry Bowers, who's this awful bully. And even like when he's doing awful things, his friends actually get to a point where they obviously take a step back and go, like, you're going too far. Whereas Stu just seems to be like, let's just fucking do it. Like,
Yeah.
and now, like you say, the whole incel thing, like you can see how that would play out if the movie was made now. But I do like the fact that he doesn't have really a motive, because I think we've spoken about before on podcasts, like it is sometimes scarier when villains don't have a
Yeah,
motive for
absolutely.
what they do. And Billy does have one, although it doesn't. I mean, it's not enough really, but it still is something that he has kind of clung on to. But but yeah, I think the finale of this film is just absolutely incredible. I think the whole bit in the house, and then I think the way it ends, with Gail Weathers doing her kind of like covered in cuts and bruises.
Mm.
It all began with a 911
You
call
two
and the music.
dipshits.
Like
That's a
she's
great
like,
line.
oh,
How
it's
about this
just
for an
so.
ending? The plucky reporter turns up and gets the best of you two dipshits. Fucking love that line.
It's just such a great ending, and then that amazing music obviously kicks in again at the end.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think the music in this film is just fucking
Well, I
incredible.
mean, again, it subverts your expectations, doesn't it? Because we get Randy says at that point when when Billy's on the floor, he says, this is the part where the killer comes back for one last scare, and he kind of does, but it gets it gets cut short by Sydney just fucking shooting him in the head, and the epic line of "not in my movie," which is it's just perfect. There's so much that is perfect about this film.
I know. I mean, I love it. I can't really heap enough praise on how much I love it, and I think it is. It's just perfect, like you said.
And I mean, what do you think about its sort of legacy? Because obviously, in terms of what it meant for the horror genre and cinema in the late 90s, it very much reignited that sort of need or lust for this kind of horror. We very quickly after this we get I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban
Hmm.
Legend, Valentine, and numerous remakes of sort of these epic slasher films. Bloody Valentine, When a Stranger When a Stranger Calls, films like that. For the next 6 7 years, are just kind of box office and DVD gold. What how do you think it sort of what do you think its legacy is for that sort of
It's
time period?
I think it reignited the slasher genre, like with things like I Know What You Did Last Summer, with a lot of these remakes, things like H2O, The Faculty, like
Hmm.
it's breathed, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
breathed life into like at the time a genre that was kind of dying a little bit, and ever since the genre's been doing well. I mean, for the last like 25 years, we keep getting more different slashers that are subverting tropes. Obviously, I don't know if we'll come to talk about the Scream sequels, but I mean, we've got another one due out next year.
Yeah.
I mean, I really think it did a lot for the genre, and it did kind of reignite and made people interested. Also, like what we were talking about, it made people go back and look at stuff that they maybe hadn't seen, especially if you
Yeah,
were at a kind of formative age. You were then going, oh, I want to see Friday the 13th, I want to see Nightmare on Elm Street. You were going back to all these movies. And yeah, I think it did tons for the genre. And I think now it is seen as a kind of classic as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think it is. It's such an important film in the history of cinema, really, because
Mm-hmm.
it does take that sort of step to make things more relevant, I suppose. And you know, the legacy that came before it of your Nightmare on Elm Street, your Friday the 13th, your Halloweens, everything, you know, everything that came before it is thrown into this film and just elevates it above everything else that could have been from this time.
Absolutely.
It's, you know, it gave us that. It's, you know, all those, you know, people of a certain age that would have grown up with Freddy and Jason. You know, we grew up with Ghostface. We grew up with, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the fisherman from I Know What You Did Last Summer and all that sort of stuff. It's such an important film, you know, and I think when we talk about all the other films that we're talking about and will talk about on this Mega Duel season, you know, this is very much an outlier because it isn't. It's kind of a film that maybe wouldn't exist without some of the films that we've already discussed and are going to
Yeah.
discuss in a way. You know, but it's so important. You know, it doesn't take anything away from it that it's, you know, it wouldn't exist without certain horror films. But I don't think modern cinema would exist in the way that it does without Scream.
No, I totally agree. And of course, it gave us the scary movie franchise.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it gave us a Scream franchise, you know, and I think, you know, when you talk about slasher franchises, I think, you know, there's some that are maybe not as good as others, but it's one of the most consistent slasher franchises in existence, I think.
I
I
really,
don't
yeah.
think there's a bad film in any of them. There are films that I enjoy less and films that maybe
Mhm.
don't hit the mark, but I think it's, you know, it's one of the most consistent horror franchises in existence.
If you compare it to other slashers, it's more consistent than Halloween. It's more consistent than Friday the 13th. It's more consistent than Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, maybe because I've got so much love for the original, I'm quite forgiving about the rest of the movies. But I mean, Scream 2, I think, is actually really good. Scream 4, I really enjoyed. Scream 3, I think it's maybe slightly weaker, but looking back on it now, it's got some interesting stuff to say, especially in the light of all the kind of Harvey Weinstein stuff.
Hmm.
And then the two most recent ones, Scream 5, I actually did really enjoy. I don't know if part of that was a kind of nostalgia thing because you were seeing characters you hadn't seen for a while
Yeah.
and they were doing something a bit new. Scream 6, I enjoyed, but maybe not quite as much. But I do see that for Scream 7 that Nev Campbell's back and apparently Matthew Lillard.
A lot of the original cast are back, apparently. I'm not sure how that's
Yeah.
going to sort of work out, but you know, whether or not we get some sort of AI flashbacks to certain events, I don't know. But I mean, it's, you know, very similar to you. I think, you know, Scream 2 is a fucking fantastic sequel.
Yeah, it's really good.
Really strong sequel. 3, I think I've grown to love a lot more than I did in the first instance. I think
Yeah.
it really suffers from not having Kevin Williamson at that point.
Yep.
But it's still a damn fine film. 4, I'm not as high on as everybody else, but I think it's fresh enough because it comes so far after Scream 3 and the original that it sort of takes us to. It allows that sort of the the new zeitgeist of horror to be referenced and the new technology and everything else.
Aye, because they stream stuff on like basically like YouTube and stuff,
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
they? In
yeah,
that one.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
you know, kind of the same thing with Five Cream as well. You know, we get a certain amount of time has passed, and you know, we're reviewing horror in a different way, and we're
Yep.
consuming films in a different way as well. You know, toxic sort of fandom and stuff like that, which is addressed and keeps it kind of fresh. And I really like Scream 6. I know a lot
Oh,
of
did you?
a lot of people weren't so high on it, but I really liked it because I like the fact that it stripped all that away, and we start with this kill at the start, and somebody
Oh, the
saying,
kill's brilliant at the start.
and
Yeah.
somebody says, who who gives a fuck about the movies, and then we're in for a different story because it is like we're not playing that game this time. We're just purely what turns out to be a complete sort of revenge story kind of thing.
I think my issue with the last one is that people were stabbed to within an inch of their life and they somehow still made it out at the
Yeah,
end of
well,
the movie.
I thought that as well, and then when I rewatched Scream for this, I thought, well, fucking Dewey's literally stabbed in the fucking spine at the end of this film, and he survives. A lot of people kind of survive in various points of the film. I think they didn't sort of. Yeah, but yeah, I can see that. I can see that with 6. I think they could have just done away with Gale Weathers at the end of 6, and it
Yeah.
being quite happy to do so, and maybe one of the twins. But yeah, I
Still
think
looking forward to the next one though.
well, yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's still
yeah.
again, it's been consistent enough that you're not thinking, fuck, I can't be arsed with this. It's not like, I mean, even the Alien franchise now, I could be quite, I'd probably watch it, but I'd be quite happy not to watch another fucking Alien
Yeah.
film or a Predator film or, various different franchises that have been, whipped within an inch of their lives. But Scream, I'd still be like, yeah, I'd be quite interested to see what they can do or what they will do.
Yeah, me too.
And that's the mark of a good franchise. And it all starts with Screamer, which I think is, it's an absolutely fine choice for one of the best horror movies ever made.
I love
it. And what it also has is an X-Files connection. Obviously, you're my co-host, or I'm your co-host over at the so-called X-Files podcast, so you should really know who this is.
It's not Courtney Cox.
No.
Fuck.
Admittedly, it's a later episode that you're maybe not as familiar with as some of the
Right,
movies.
okay, go for it.
So, W. Earl Brown, who plays Kenny, who's the cameraman, Gale Weathers' cameraman, he played a character called Robert Faisal in season 9's Underneath.
Ah, right, okay, yeah, the later seasons are. We'll come on to that on the so-called X-Files podcast, but they are probably weaker for me. But I'm glad there's an X-Files connection.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that time, isn't it? X-Files was way into its sort of the height of its popularity at this point. So I think Scream and X-Files are two very important pieces of media within the 90s sort of horror landscape.
Absolutely.
So it'd be it'd be a shame if there wasn't a connection there. But yes, there we go. That's Vanessa's choice for the best horror film. And I mean, I must admit, this film has a line that I use in my day-to-day life as well, which is Stu says it quite early in the film. He says, "I was only half serious." When he's talking to Sydney about him wanting to, it's some kind of sexy talk anyway.
Ah, right, okay.
But I always use that, especially at work. I was only half serious. But yeah, there we go. So thank you very much, Vanessa, for presenting us with Scream. It's been an absolute delight to talk about it. I fucking love this film.
Yeah, me too.
And a very sort of memorable, informative film for me in the landscape of my horror fandom. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
So do you want to take this time just to tell the good people about the so-called X-Files?
Yeah, so I think we are now on season 3 of the so-called X-Files podcast. So every season we use a couple of episodes just to go through the mythology of each season, and then we pick combined our kind of top 10 Monster of the Week episodes. We then do a kind of also rans where we run through the ones that we haven't given a full episode to. We've had a few guests on there as well. So check out the so-called X-Files podcast on anywhere you get your podcasts.
Excellent. George seems to have ramped up his snoring just for the
Oh, for
end of
fuck's
this.
sake.
It seems to have
I know. He's obviously not interested in Scream.
it's gone very high pitched there. But yes, check out the So-Called X-Files podcast with me and Vanessa. It's an absolute delight to do, and if you love 90s horror media, then it's the place to go.
Exactly.
But yes, so join us next time, in which we'll be talking about Tarquin's choice for the best horror movie ever. But for now, it just leaves me to say goodbye, and for Vanessa to say,
My mum and dad are going to be so mad at me.
my mom and dad are going to be so mad.
Oh, see, you've done it better than I did.